Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts hears Y Cross every time his mom walks him on the street. It worked in my head. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. He does actually try to cross the street anytime he hears a dog on the other side of it. I guess I should have added that context. That's Lenny. That very generous laugh, a little bit sympathetic, you just heard was Mike Golic Jr. Because today, the annual, the much awaited, the often imitated, never replicated Mina Kimes Show Team Draft. Woo! We were trying to figure out how many years we've done it, Mike. I think it's been 5. And
wild.
The results, well, let's just say they're not pretty.
You know what? The results are, again, as always, largely under protest. This is a contest where every year I sent Mina the text this morning. What do I need to know in terms of the rules that you have changed about scoring to make sure that this works out for you? Because I win one time 2 years ago, and then everything has to change immediately. So I am glad to be back. As always, it is an honor to be nominated, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get the Y-Cross joke. I was slow.
The rules have been the same for a few years now, and I will remind folks of them. The way this works, we are drafting NFL teams based on, with an eye, towards both wins in the regular season and wins in the playoff. And the points are weighted to that effect. You get 1 point for every win your team earns. You get 5 points if they make the playoffs, 5 points if they make the divisional round, 10 points if they make a conference championship, 10 points if they make the Super Bowl, and then 5 if they win. I think that was the major change. It was a little bit too skewed towards winning the Super Bowl. And last year was very close, which I think suggests that the point system is working, to be honest. As always, we turn to loyal listener, friend of the show, Sam Hoppin, who does a fantastic job, thank you, Sam, of tabulating the results for us every year. I ended up winning 238 to 209, which is pretty close, I think, compared to previous seasons. And I'll just recap a little bit of what happened last year. It was really even because we both got the conference championship teams. You had the Niners and the Lions. I had the Chiefs and the Ravens. Some other, I would say, like, great picks that we both had. You had the Texans and the Rams. You got near the great value near the end of the draft. For me, it was really the Packers, the Steelers, the Bucks, who really bolstered my case. Otherwise, it was pretty evenly matched between us last season.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a good reminder going back and seeing the order. And again, Sam renders this beautifully too. He's an absolute gift to this podcast and to the timeline. But seeing where I got a couple of those teams at the bottom is a good reminder. None of us expected that to happen with Houston last year. The Rams also, especially that late season surge, became such an incredible thing to watch that we are likely to stumble into something like that again for some of the teams near the bottom of the barrel right now who managed to put it all together somehow.
Yeah, and there's always a balance here because wins do matter, which makes you consider, obviously, division. You're looking at divisions that are more easily won. You're looking at strength of schedule. But because it is so weighted towards playoff success, you obviously want to capture sort of that upside variance and grab a team that not only makes it to the playoffs, but actually wins games in the playoffs. So, those are kind of the parameters. They're the same. I'm not changing them. What I am changing is you are going to pick first this year because I think the first pick last year. I assumed I took the Chiefs first, but actually I should have gone back and looked at it. It's an easy assumption. I'm going to keep track on my end of who takes which team because I tend to forget these things. So, Mike Golic Jr., you're up with the first pick. By the way, guys, Mike Golic Jr., I'm sorry. I just brought you in. I didn't even introduce you. He's the host of Golic.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm the co-host of Gojo and Golic. You can check us out Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well. So I appreciate you having me. You know what? At this point, it's because I think I've been around here so long. I'm basically like furniture in the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny narrative universe. So I can understand how that would happen from time to time, but I appreciate the promo nonetheless.
It's like when you have first-time hosts on SNL, you got to really, they're here to, promote a movie, and this is their career. And then when it's I don't know. I was gonna say Justin Timberlake, but nobody likes him anymore. When it's somebody who's been on the show a lot, John Mulaney, you don't really have to like do the whole song and dance and bring him in. You're the John Mulaney of the Mina Kimes show featuring Lenny. That's a better comp. Okay,
there we go. Yeah,
you got the first pick. So let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is overly surprising. It seems like we basically just trade the baton on who's going to take this team this year. I'm not going to overthink it. I'll take Kansas City. I think especially this year, how can I do something so bold and so brave? But I think especially this year, I mean, this is an interesting team. You got them last year when we saw that wide receiver room in shambles. We weren't sure what the offense is going to look like. And really the whole year, it never really got to a great place. But Spags and that defense became such a juggernaut. Now you might actually introduce consistent quotas, the downfield passing game, again, to an offense. Because you've got the most dangerous thing, a frustrated and slighted Patrick Mahomes who saw the offense as second fiddle last year to the defense and was gasped named number 4 on the top 100 voted by the players this year. So he's got all the ammo he needs. I'll take the Chiefs.
I do have one question about the Chiefs because this is your line of expertise. There's two things I think that maybe there's some concerns about or questions. One would be just sort of the loss of the Jerry Sneed, seeing how that secondary shakes out. I'm not terribly worried about that. The other is that they will have a new starting left tackle. It seems like Kingsley Suamataia, I hope I'm saying that right. I've been practicing it, got the job. What have you seen of him thus far this season? And do you think that they could actually have improved offensive line play from last season?
Yeah, I won't go so far as to say improve, just because obviously with last year you have to factor injury a little bit in the left tackle spot late in the season. And listen, we remember the Juwan Taylor, snap infraction stuff that went on. Like, I have a feeling that'll mostly be ironed out this year. But as far as Kingsley, it's a small sample size in the preseason. I liked him a lot. Physical freak in nature coming out of college. But he's, once again, and I think we'll talk about this with some of the other teams like Dallas that have young offensive linemen in critical spots where that's a position, the pedigree of the room matters a lot. The coaching that you get in Kansas City along that room, certainly having guys like Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey and the rest of that group that are so veteran on the interior and so accomplished, they're able to get these guys up to speed. And Pat doesn't take sacks. This offense can use multiple tight ends, motion, and all these things, including a robust screen game to help kind of offset a young player in the early going who might be getting his feet wet. But he is super talented, great feet, dynamic athlete. So I think there is reason to be encouraged, but overall it's confidence in the operation there that's really good at onboarding these guys.
Okay, so I've been trying to talk myself out of taking this pick number 2 because right now there's just so much tumult around the San Francisco 49ers. Obviously the Brandon Ayuk situation, Trent Williams situation as of this recording are unresolved. And I've mentioned this on, I don't know if I've talked about it on my show, but the Niners, they had such great health last year. I think they were 4th in adjusted games lost. And you look at this team and you see players who have injury history, superstars, and you think there's no way that can happen again. But they're just so dang stacked. Mm-hmm. And the other team that I would be considering in the NFC, a team that I am actually now kind of leaning towards representing the conference in the Super Bowl, they're in, I believe, such a difficult division that it gives me a little bit of pause. You can kind of guess who that might be. So I'm going to take the Niners with pick 2.
Yeah, I totally understand. I'm with you. It's one of those things that we kind of sit around all offseason, and because they've been talked about so much, we think, oh, it must be really dire straits there. And then you do look at everyone up and down that roster in most levels, and you're like, oh, that's right. It's still, and we understand the potential changes coming with the Brock Purdy contract next year. And the Trent Williams thing is the one that sort of nerves me out just because Trent is the guy that we've seen that's willing to actually miss games if necessary. And in the playoffs, we saw that offensive line when you could get up in Brock Purdy's face and bother him for a team that likes to operate and does as well out of empty as this group does. I don't think that's insignificant in terms of the resources up front.
I was just, on-off splits can be, misleading, but I was just grabbing them with Trent Williams the other day, and it's common. Like even just last 2 years with him, they have the most efficient offense in football. Without him, it drops to actually below average. Now, there have been other players missing during that time. But yeah, which, by the way, makes me just part of the reason I haven't been taking it super seriously is I don't distrust his willingness to hold out and, like you said, and stand on business. But the Niners know he's indispensable. So I just have kind of been assuming it's like a Walter Jones type deal where they'll just get it done. All right, pick 3.
All right, pick 3. I am going to go with Detroit here.
Okay, that was the team I was alluding to.
I figured as much, and I understand the complaints about the division. Like you said, a lot of this is, finding a team, and at this upper crust we're at right now, these are teams that are legitimate Super Bowl contenders, and the Lions have now, after, going with the drought with playoff victories, now going back-to-back in a postseason with them, they've ascended to that place, and, losing, stuff like losing Jonah Jackson this offseason on that offensive line, it pops up, but they've managed to secure pretty much the entire rest of that group. They locked down basically every meaningful piece of that offense. I know you just talked to Amon-Ra St. Brown the other day on the podcast. And so it's just a really easy group to trust because they've been built the right way. Defensively, another influx of talent trying in that secondary there. You bring DJ Reader up front with Aleem McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson, who's full-blown, edge star status now. So there's reason to believe that side of the ball will keep improving as well. And this offense, Ben Johnson keeps coming back home, so that we keep getting the benefit of continuity with a group that's really good at running the ball and throwing deep play action over the middle.
Does it worry you at all that within their own division is a team that I believe, I don't know how you feel, is a legitimate, not just a playoff team, but a legitimate contender to make a deep run talking about the Green Bay Packers?
Yeah, listen, it's definitely a concern. At the same time, part of this, and the Packers are a little bit of a projection, right? Just because defensively with Hafley, there's going to be a bunch of stuff. We don't know yet. I actually am one that thinks it's going to be a good marriage of the skill sets you've drafted, especially in the front seven and, the back end, being able to let them play more press man. I think it's going to work, but I think at the end of the day, Detroit's just been so fortunate in getting to retain so much quality, not only their players, but their coaching staff. And I think when you get down to these close margins, that stuff does matter, even if Green Bay's got the quarterback with the infinitely higher ceiling of the two.
Okay, so I am been waffling between 2 AFC teams for my next pick. I'm gonna go chalk here though and take the Ravens, who, by the way, I was looking at Football Outsiders. They have them projected to have the second most wins in the NFL. They have 11.2 with their DVOA based projection, in part because again, off of the Football Outsiders, or probably FTN. This is from the Football Almanac, which you guys should definitely check out. They actually have the Ravens with a fairly easy schedule this year, 21st, which seems surprising because the AFC North, but it has to do, I think, with the rest of their competition. I just think offensively, you talked about the continuity in Detroit. I love that they're going to have now a full offseason to build off of with Todd Monken, and a little bit of concerns about the offensive line. Obviously, you got losses, both talent and coaching on defense, but early returns on Nate Wiggins, super exciting. I just think that they've got so many dudes, like true superstar blue chip players on that side of the ball, that they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think we've worn the spine commentary into the ground. And are you just at a base level just excited to see Derrick Henry wearing the all-black Ravens uniforms and achieving the aesthetic nirvana?
It's just the sickest. It's honestly, it's his aura is so powerful that even like the running backs don't matter crowd. I've noticed this offseason that, and also like situationally, I think there's the expectation that, him being in better circumstances will give him a little bit of a boost. I
do think him and Lamar Jackson, that unique combination of skill sets, is something that you talk about. The offensive line, legitimate concern when you have 3 different guys. You got a rookie starting at right tackle, but to have a guy in Lamar Jackson who I think almost a fifth of his carries last year went for 10 plus, and Derrick Henry was second to only Christian McCaffrey in terms of yards after contact among running backs with 100 or more carries. Like, you've got thunder and lightning in the backfield on every play with your quarterback and running back. Oh, by the way, Lamar coming off maybe his best downfield passing season of his NFL career. So I just think it helps those guys a lot and makes that a little less of a worry in my mind.
And then at some point they get even more lightning back with Keaton Mitchell, which Derrick Henry and Keaton Mitchell is such a fun combo. Okay, that's the top 4. We went pretty chalky there with the championship teams. And this is where it gets a little interesting.
And I think this is going to technically be me stealing from you, because I know you've been really high on this team, and I've joined in as well. I'll go Buffalo here.
Ooh, okay.
I'll pick the Bills here. Now, again, we've talked about some of the things in terms of ability to win your division. You've got Miami and a Jets team that needs a lot to come together, but has talent, has a Hall of Fame quarterback on its roster if it stays healthy. And, again, you referenced FTN, which I feel like doing the FTN Football Outsiders thing is sort of the equivalent of calling them the San Diego Chargers still, where it's a mistake we're going to understandably make for a while. Number one in terms of strength of schedule right now, looking out to this season.
Yeah, that's why I was scared off of them for this exercise. I'm very high on the team. I'm very high. I think the offense will be fine, even with loss of Matt Milano, who obviously didn't play last season. I still think this defense will be good, but that strength of schedule spooked me from taking them top 7.
Yeah, it scares me a little bit. But again, if we're talking about at this point in the draft of like teams that I think are capable of making a deep playoff run and potentially even winning a Super Bowl, like, you simplified the equation a little bit at the end of last year when Joe Brady took over, where it was, hey, we got the battering ram quarterback who now all of a sudden has grown into being a quarterback that can help elevate his receivers. And we've got an offensive line that's a good, experienced unit now. Mitch Morse, we know, down in Jacksonville, so you slide some pieces around internally, but guys that have been there. And then defensively, that front seven dealt with so much injury last year, and unfortunately, Matt Milano gone again now with the injury before the season at this point. But I just think they kind of showed you a lot of the guys they've drafted and developed. We talked about the spine with Baltimore, but Ed Oliver on defense, on the offense, going down that group and adding, one of my favorite off-speed pitches at running back and Ray Davis out of the draft this last year. I just think it's an easy team to sell me on a floor with, and then Josh Allen's the ceiling.
Okay, with my third pick, the 6th pick, am going with the Houston Texans, who's actually was the other AFC team I was considering. I'm going to talk more about the Texans in depth on pod. We're doing the preseason take fest again with Barnwell and Dominique, so I won't get too into it. But I'll just say this: I've talked about the Texans a lot this offseason. I think the offense and defense, both amazing additions, stacked, great coaching, elite young quarterback, obvious, all of that. But there's something about calling the Rams preseason game against them and realizing that this team has more receivers and running backs than it knows what to do with, that really reinforced for me, oh my God, they're so stacked on that side of the ball. And ultimately, I think I know that they cut Noah Brown, who would, certainly be a wide receiver 3 on a number of teams. And it's just kind of one of those things where when you see the end of the roster, you're like, oh my God, if these are the, bottom depth guys, how good are they at the top? So give me the Texans.
All right, so we got the Texans mixed in. So now this is, to me, where the draft gets really interesting, because we're each 3 teams in, and we've got the 6 teams right now that I think both of us would pick in a lot of these cases to win their division and be able to go on here. So we've got 2 divisions left that have someone who's got to win the division and get to the playoffs, but those are the NFC East and the NFC South, which are complicated divisions to say the least. So this is where the strategy starts to get interesting in terms of which of these teams actually has a ceiling beyond what we've got going. It's a good way to filibuster while I think to just barf this out of you.
The NFC East, I have gone back and forth a million times on who I think wins that division. I think I might still be undecided. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say if you end up going in that direction.
Yeah, and I think just for that reason, before we start getting, well, actually, you know what? No, because, all right.
Well, just to remind folks, too, so you get points for wins and you get points for making the playoffs, but you don't actually get points for winning the division. Right. So there's not a benefit to picking the winner of the NFC South. I guess there is a benefit because the winner of the NFC South will make it to the playoffs, and it's unlikely that anyone else in the division will. So there is that, but it's not a huge bump from picking the division winner or anything.
No. So with that being said, I think here is where I'll go. I'll go Cincinnati here.
Oh, okay.
I'll dip into the Bengals now since you got the Ravens already. I'll make it interesting in the AFC North, and the debate there between them and Cleveland in terms of that, what that's going to look like, I think is just deferential to Joe Burrow here. There are some things that have been complicated about their offseason. The defense has to show it can take that step back to form after being an awful tackling unit last year, a team that really struggled to defend the run, especially in the red zone, but getting Von Bell, Geno Stone over there at the safety room to kind of clear that group up, adding some help on the defensive front. I think that group will be able to kind of course correct, and then you just got to keep Joe upright, and thankfully you've got a bunch of tall beef that you just keep stockpiling in front of him.
One thing I love about this Bengals pick is they have the 5th easiest schedule in the entire NFL last year because they didn't have Joe Burrow last year, obviously. So that certainly works in their favor for this exercise. My expectation is that the offense looks as good as ever. I do have a lot of questions about that defense. So, but good coaching goes a long way. Okay, so this is another one where I'm still going to stay away from the NFC East and the NFC South.
Yep.
I'm going to go Packers here. I just freaking love the Packers. I mean, I actually got some grief for it. I just did the NFC North, and just let me put it this way. Fans of teams other than the Packers felt like it was a very the Packers love fest, if you will. I'm sorry. I just love this offense. I just love watching Jordan Love. I just think Matt LaFleur is incredible. I am curious to see what you alluded to, which is how Hafley's defense maps out onto the with the players that they do have, particularly on the back end. I think on the front, it makes a lot of sense. But this to me is a ceiling pick because I have been picking the Lions to win the division, but I think the Packers have a good a chance as any team in the NFC of actually making it to the Super Bowl.
Yep, I would agree. Last 9 weeks of the season, Jordan Love, we've all beaten it kind of into the ground at this point. Offensive line is going to be interesting. Jordan Morgan moving to the interior now. It looks like he could start at guard on a group that's like the poster for cross-training in the NFL along that position. You've got a bunch of Swiss Army knives.
I'm like, they'll be fine. Zach Tom can play anything. Just keep moving him around. Maybe that's a little bit sunny.
Well, I know you. I wonder if he still qualifies because I know you've done the NFL hipster podcast pick on here, and I wonder if Zach Tom still qualifies as a true NFL hipster pick in terms of favorite players. But no, that one makes perfect sense.
Okay, that is 8. You have the 9th pick. Who are you gonna take?
For this one, I'll go off the board. I'll take Philly here.
Okay.
I'll buy ceiling on Philadelphia. We know the story of last season. The Jason Kelce loss understandably scares people. Kellen Moore coming in and how much of it is going to be that blend of old versus new with what Jalen Hurts has done and meant as a rusher in that team. But I think the rest of that offensive line can insulate it. The Saquon Barkley thing, it's hard to have a normal opinion, it feels like, on this, but I do think it'll be enough better than the Giants just because of that group in front of him to go out there and justify it. And they still got dudes at a lot of spots. Defensively, there's some concerns, but the biggest difference between me and them in Dallas is they tried this offseason. They went out and they tried to address all of these things. Whether or not it's actually going to ramp up is going to be dependent on a lot of the former Georgia Bulldogs in their front seven and what they're able to do and some of the stuff with the young guys in the secondary. But I just, again, we've seen the ball go through the basket with them, which is somewhat of a cop-out, but I put a lid on Dallas at some point in terms of what I think this team can accomplish, especially knowing the very real flaws that they've got in areas that bite you in the NFC and in December and January and, God forbid, February football.
I'll hedge you with Dallas then as my pick. I don't feel strongly one way or the other. Cowboys, Eagles, I think your points are really valid. With the Eagles, for me, the big question mark is kind of just the defense. I want to see. It was just so bad last season. Obviously, they've made a lot of additions, improvements, coaching change, whatever. Kind of want to see it. Dallas, though, I think there are we've talked about them all off season. The inertia, if you will. For me, though, Mike, I think this is kind of a bet on a couple of things. Dak Prescott was a top 3 quarterback until the very end. Yep. And while I'm not going to say you lose one of the best left tackles last 10 years and get better, early returns are pretty good on this young offensive line. Oops, they did it again, right? To me, this is a bet on the offense. And then you have, one of the best pass rushers in football. The Bland injury definitely hurts this defense. But I think the offense will still be good enough to win a lot of games. So.
Yep, I would agree. Tyler, it really is. Tyler Guyton was not a guy I was super high on coming out, but then you see him go to Dallas, and it's like, well, they're just going to do what they've done and continue to get these incredibly gifted players up to speed. And like, you'll see, like, he's going to make mistakes over the course of this year, but he's already using his tools to get out of those in a way that just reeks of, hey, Zach Martin's in this room with me. I think I can learn a thing or two about the technique it takes to win at this level. So,
all right. Top 10 in the books. Let's move on. 11. I know who I want.
I'm gonna go. My. You know what? I'll pick a little bit with my. This is probably gonna be a bit of an overdraft here, but I'll pick the Rams.
Really?
I have just been so in love with this team. The injury stuff scares me a little bit coming out of the preseason.
I'm spooked on these injuries.
Yeah, and I mean, you've seen this team up close and personal, so I figured I'd save you from having to betray the Ramley, but I think again, if they can all be healthy, and right now we understand that's a little bit of it, but it was last year. Like, this was a team that last year is about what they managed to do in a small-ish sample size, turning over a lot of talent. No Aaron Donald lives here anymore on defense, but again, you want to talk about early returns. We were out at Rams camp and heard a lot of good things about the young Florida State defensive line they're putting out there with Fisk and Verse. I was surprised at the Ernest Jones trade there, just because he seemed to be a guy that was so lauded as the leader there. So you tell me, is the Omar Spates hype real? Is that something I should read into?
I mean, he was awesome during the preseason, like to the point where he was undrafted. He was, I guess, misused at LSU based on the LSU fans in my mentions when I tweeted about him. He looked unbelievable, but it was the preseason, right? Like, the Rams didn't play any good quarterbacks in the preseason, but they see it on practice, so they know obviously what he's capable of. But again, he was incredible during the preseason, so that surprised me too, because they're very thin at linebacker. But I've talked about this offense. I think it could be top 5-3 offense. Yeah. But the offensive line injuries had me a little bit concerned. But it's a good pick for the upside, because if they're healthy, they're a total legitimate contender. Okay, so this is about the nature of the game for me, because again, so we haven't picked the NFC South, and I'm looking at that because you do get 5 points for making the playoffs.
Yep.
However, I'm actually going to go Dolphins here, because I think they'll make the playoffs and I think they'll win a lot of games. Now, what they do when they get there, I'm not sure, but I think that if I'm thinking about them versus strategically the NFC South winner, who I also don't, I wouldn't pick to be like a favorite in the playoffs based now. I'm going to go with the team that I think has probably a higher regular season win upside.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. This is a team, my questions, the defense, you lose a huge cog up front, and just, different system. You're one of the teams that also had some change on that side of the ball this offseason. But the offense, whatever you think about Tua and the general discourse, like, it's a good offense. It rips. They've got speed to burn everywhere. Like, he does get the ball out quick, as much as I had a little bit of a, burr up my ass about the nature of those comments the other day relative to the offensive line. Like, analyzing it, he's not wrong. He is a major asset to that group in that way. So, yeah, no, great
For
pick.
those who missed it, he was asked about the offensive line, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, well, brother, it doesn't matter because I get the ball out so quick, I think is factual and funny. And yeah, but there is the locker room management side of it, which I won't pretend to know. Okay, you're up.
Yeah, you know what? Here's an interesting spot, and I'm already bought into this division, but like you said, wins, potential playoff upside. I'll take the Jets here. If it hits, which is kind of the question, it's asking a lot to come together in a way that we have not seen, but the defense has been blue chip stock for the last few seasons now under Rob Saleh, and offensively, they've got a bunch of weapons. You're asking that offensive line to certainly come in, but I was looking up the other day for a show that I did with our buddy Nate Tice over at Yahoo, and you've gotten good early feedback on Olu Fashanu, their top pick out of Penn State, as like the guy who looks like he's going to be the swing tackle there. But Tyron Smith, and we know the when he's healthy of it all is the big part of the conversation with him. But in terms of like the instant impact on that offensive line, Tyron Smith was in one-on-one situations last year, 84.5% of his pass blocking snaps, according to Next Gen Stats. That was the third highest among left tackles. He allowed a pressure rate of 6.7% on those snaps, which was the lowest rate among left tackles with at least 300 snaps. So like the guy still looked like the gold jacket that he's going to wear soon. It's just you're always waiting for that other shoe to drop, or in this case, like a walking boot, unfortunately. But I do think, again, the choice they had there, where a lot of people thought, hey, do you go tight end in the draft at that spot? Going O-line there, I think was a good understanding of what this team needs to be successful this year, and it's the group up front. Yeah,
I loved that pick. I love that they, hedged the injury there. I love the upside with Smith. I think it'll be interesting to see how much Mike Williams plays. I think, though, even if Mike Williams doesn't play the full season, because the defense should continue to be so good. Although, well, I mean, Hassan Reddick is still not in the building. I don't know, dude. That story has reached the point where, like, he's taken so much money in fines, right? Or, like, I think it's up to, like, $5 million or something that I cannot, like, my brain cannot comprehend the mind of someone willing to do that. So I'm like incapable of offering analysis on it. Does that make sense? I'm just like,
oh no, 100%. It's such a foreign concept to me to be like, my dad has my favorite story about it because my dad was, a late round NFL draft pick who played 9 years as a rotation guy and a late starter. And, it was in a time where he didn't make a ton of money. Like I think the most my dad made was like $750,000, which is a lot for human people, but in NFL, especially now, it's not a ton of money. And he had his jersey untucked one time, and like the referee told him to tuck it back in because it was a uniform violation. Like it was, a thing that you got to do. And my dad told him to bleep off because he was tired in a game, and he got mailed like a 10 grand fine. And my mom looked at him and she's like, who do you think we are? Like, we can't afford, like, we don't need this hit in your salary already. So yeah, that's how I'm wired, where I look at this and it's just otherworldly to me.
Yeah, I'm refraining from like setting off the panic alarms or, week one, week one's barreling down the corner. They are on Monday Night Football against the San Francisco 49ers, and the absence of Reddick is pretty massive for a team that leans so heavily on its four-man rush and is not particularly, they've got Will McDonald there, they've got Jermaine Johnson, but they're stronger in the interior, so we'll see. I get it, though. Like, if it hits, it hits, is the 2024 New York Jets. I'm going to go Falcons here because, I think they're going to win the division. So this feels like good value for me. They also obviously have a very easy schedule. The entire NFC South does. If they win the division, they get that 5-point bump for making the playoffs. And I do think that this offense has a lot of upside. And I obviously like the defensive additions, which I've talked about. So this feels like good value.
Yeah, and I feel like we've come a long way from when the first news of the Kirk Cousins move dropped, and we were all like, oh man, this offense, all the former top 10 picks, and Kirk Cousins was playing the best football of his career last year, to now being like, all right, this is an older quarterback coming off of an Achilles, and this is the Atlanta Falcons, and have kind of I think adjusted expectations accordingly. That feels right.
Have you seen that video that's going viral today of the woman at the U.S. Open where the older gentleman brings her a couple of drinks and then she reaches up and grabs the drink from some unpictured guy? That, to me, is Terry Fun of the Atlanta Falcons picking Michael Penix in the draft. Kirk Cousins but I got 2 drinks. That said, none of that will matter if he stays healthy. And looks good, looks anything like expected. Okay, so you are up next, and I think that'll bring us to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 15.
All right, well, in the interest of then playing the game in here, I'll go New Orleans on this one. FTN has them predicted just under 10 wins, which is a reflection of an incredibly easy schedule. Once again, it was kind of the same conversation we had about these teams in the South last year, was an incredibly easy schedule, veteran quarterback, a lot of continuity. Like, isn't a team I'm excited to watch ever? No, not at all. I would try and probably limit that as much as possible, but they are capable. In this division where it is really interesting to look at, last year, the one team we haven't talked about, this is the one team that's actually won the division last year, but as we'll get to with them, they did it in a way that seems a little bit unsustainable, and so I have my questions.
Are you familiar with the hashtag The Agenda on Saints Twitter?
No.
So every time I've posted anything about Spencer Rattler playing well in the preseason, it just gets filled with the snake emojis and then the agenda. So there is a sort of I don't know what you would call it, kind of like a Rebel Alliance type sect forming on Saints Twitter that just wants Spencer Rattler to play.
Wow.
Which,
I love this.
Yeah, I know. I love it too. Incredibly funny draft pick, because you really could not build a quarterback in a lab more different from Derek Carr than Spencer Rattler. And I think last year Saints fans soured pretty quickly on Carr. I mean, the thing with Carr, is that if the protection's not good, he's not a quarterback who can overcome that. And I think there's obviously very legitimate questions about this Saints offensive line. So,
yeah.
The agenda might
you and I talked about some of these rookies who have come from disadvantaged college situations where they were used to being under duress.
Yo.
My brother in Christ, Spencer Rattler, how you doing? And just watching that guy, it was honestly incredibly impressive going back, because I covered their first game to open last season, South Carolina against North Carolina. And I remember my only real takeaway from that one was, one, okay, he's under duress a lot, but also seeing him in that game compared to Drake May, who I said is more like an archer, where hey, he feathers the ball in nice. He's got a strong enough arm, but it's about all the things he can do with it.
Yeah.
Spencer Rattler, that thing is a cannon that he has got strapped to his arm, and he's just, the house is burning down around him, and he is just calm, stepping up and delivering that thing. It was really impressive.
All right, 16th pick, halfway point. I'm doing it. I'm taking the Seattle Seahawks.
There we go.
Who I think Vegas has I think they're 7.5. I would take the over on that. I mean, this offense, questions about the offensive line, particularly right tackle. We don't know what's going on with Abe Lucas, but everything else, I just think it can absolutely go. We talked about a little bit earlier this week with Ollie Connolly, the glimpse we got of the Ryan Grubb offense with Geno Smith. Just bombing it downfield. JSN looks great. Defense losing Uchenna Nwosu to a couple weeks. He was not IR'd, notably, to injury is not ideal. But I am optimistic about the defense being better than last year, because, frankly, it wouldn't be that hard to be better than it was last year. So give me the Seahawks here as a potential NFC wildcard team.
The NFC is going to be a ton of fun this year, I think. It's just a boatload of, we've talked about three of the teams already, and we'll get to the Cardinals at some point, but it is wild with Seattle how perfect it is almost you just slide over. If you were to have one of those things you used to draw on the overhead projector where it's an image of the paper, and you slide it over perfectly, and the Ryan Grubb offense and the things that made it successful at Washington with those receivers just happened to fit perfectly with what was here in Seattle. And Mike McDonald, with some of the things that he did in Baltimore, now the second and third level, I don't know if you've got, a Kyle Hamilton and a Roquan Smith sitting around there, but you at least drafted your Justin Madubuike and Byron Murphy, who is sick. So
I think the corners are going to really thrive in the new scheme. Witherspoon, oh my God. Okay. And by the way, 16 is not a homer pick for Seattle. I'm sure, I don't know what your big board looks like, but I'm sure that they were about in that territory for you too.
No, we're definitely in that range right now. This is all kind of gone. I made up little categories on my big board, and they were in froggy, but big changes.
Froggy. All right. After the break, we'll see if we have any other froggy teams coming up next, because Mike Golic Jr.'s got the next pick. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the types of benefits only Caesars can offer: hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. Okay, we are back. First 16 picks are in the book. Just to recap, Chiefs, Niners, Lions, Ravens, Bills, Texans, Bengals, Packers, Eagles, Cowboys, Rams, Dolphins, Jets, Falcons, Saints, Seahawks. Mike Golic Jr., you are up with pick 17.
All right.
This is where it gets hard. This is where the real winners, like the real gems, are selected.
Oh. I feel like at this point here, a lot of it is me betting on, like, is there something I can count on that I know for sure in there? And I think for that reason, I'm going to go with Cleveland.
Yeah,
the defense is just going to be disgusting again this year. And we know it's all about what happens with Deshaun Watson, and an offense that quite honestly has question marks surrounding that. Like, your top, 3 tackles last year went down with injury. You're losing maybe the best Jeff Stoutland and Bill Callahan probably hand in hand for the 2 most impactful offensive line coaches in the NFL currently to go along with that. Nick Chubb starting the year on the PUP list. And so, like, all of these things are concerns, but again, the defense is going to give you every chance in the world, and the bones of that offense there are good, provided your quarterback goes out there and performs even at average, which we only really saw in flashes last year with Deshaun before the injury.
If he's average, this is a great pick, because if he's average, even if the defense regresses a little bit, let's say they go from the number 1 defense to the number 5 defense, you're still going to win 10 games. Average quarterback play, elite defense.
Yep.
And so it makes a ton of sense. Went to this team in depth last week. We did the AFC North, or 2 weeks ago, rather. I think they're really interesting. I'm very curious to see what this offense looks like, because I feel like they've had trouble figuring out the identity of it with Deshaun Watson. You go out, you get Ken Dorsey, you bring in Tommy Reese as your pass game coordinator from college. I think it's going to look a little bit more college-y, more RPOs. Sean's going to be in the gun. So I'm just kind of curious to see whether they can figure it out, because it's kind of put up or shut up time for not just Watson, but the entire staff with him.
Yeah, those are really interesting. Tommy coming, what I will say for Browns fans who are, trying to figure out what you get in Tommy Reese, like all that David Njoku goodness from last year, you're going to get more of that, because if there's one thing Tommy Reese majors in, it is creative tight end usage. That was always more NFL than it was college there, but I'm with you too, Ken Dorsey, like, you're going to get a bunch of the RPO stuff he did with Josh. And I remember for a while they thought maybe spreading it out and doing more empty, doing more like 11 personnel stuff with Deshaun. But at this point, I think you got to lean into the rest of that roster and do a little bit more, forcing than just catering it all to him, because he's not good enough to have it catered all to him right now.
I am going to go Jags here, which I feel good about. The more I've thought about the Jags, the more I think people are kind of sleeping on them a little bit, because they melted down in such a big way last year after starting with an incredible wins record. The meltdown, I think, there were a lot of reasons that I think were not fundamental to the roster, if that makes sense. It was just screw ups on the margins, bad decisions, injuries. I'm very optimistic about this defense with Ryan Nielsen, and I don't want to put too much stock into a couple drives from the preseason, but Trevor looks super locked in. I think this offense will be better than what they were last year. So give me the Jags.
Yeah, I think this is the exact right spot for them. And honestly, as I started to kind of look at this draft board and the way it was shaking out, you want to talk about some of those teams that ended up jumping up and being the big reason last year. Jacksonville's got major potential with that, just because we're not that far removed from them being a playoff team. And we're not that far removed from Trevor Lawrence looking like, the quarterback that we all expected him to. You get Brian Thomas in there as a weapon now. Gamble on, bringing Gabe Davis down to be one of the guys that you've paid money to be a consistent, even number 2 in this. Like, if you're saying that's where you expect him to be, that is still not necessarily a place Gabe Davis has ever consistently shined during his time in Buffalo.
All right. Where are you going to go next? 18. I know what I want.
I'll go...
The suspense.
I'll go Minnesota.
Okay. Sure.
And, we'll see the final Sam Darnold test, which honestly, that part of this year from a narrative standpoint is going to be fun, because I know Sam Darnold, oft discussed and haver of hives over the years, Now someone where is a situation where we all kind of look at it and go, okay, if there's ever going to be some place that can tap into whatever people might think be left in there, it is Minnesota in the year 2024 of our Lord and Savior. So we'll see.
Well, I'll go with the opposite side of that coin. I'll take the Bears here. I think when we did the NFC North, Dan Pizzuta and I were like, you could really go Lions, Packers, and you could really go Bears, Vikings, in terms of the top and that. And by the way, all 4 teams have a legitimate chance to, obviously the top 2, but I think both the Vikings and the Bears could absolutely make the playoffs. FTN, by the way, is very low on the Bears, which is one of the more fascinating point totals I found. But that's, you got an unknown rookie quarterback that tends to be like harder to project. Just the early returns on Caleb Williams. Come on, man. I mean, he looks, as we all expected he would. And I actually think as the offseason has gone on, I've thought about it a little bit more. I've grown a bit more optimistic about the Bears defense not regressing. I've talked about the possibility of some regression there with the turnover luck, the lack of pass rush. But I also just think that secondary is the whole back seven is so talented. And if your offense is as explosive as it has the potential to be, I think they'll be in better situations too. So I'm going the Bears. Bears is like a heart pick too, because I just want to watch the Bears. They're fun.
Which, it is a thing that matters. And traditionally, even when the Bears had been good in prior years, obviously Justin Fields aside recently, but when you go all the way back to, the Jay Cutler offenses that were good, they still weren't, overly exciting. It weren't offenses that, wowed you with a lot there. And so they were productive. I don't know. I do think that there's something to that. A little bit of Hard Knocks effect. Have you watched much of the Hard Knocks? I actually haven't.
I've seen clips. Nothing's really, grabbed my attention from the Hard Knocks other than the Eberflus glow up stuff.
I will say Caleb Williams as I think the first true Gen Z quarterback making his way into the NFL in terms of embodying things that piss older generations off. It has been great to watch the approach that he has taken through all of this. Obviously a lot's been made of him picking guys like Tom Brady's brain and the diet and stuff like that, but it just sounds like from top to bottom he has approached this like someone in the CEO chair from almost the moment he got to Chicago. And so I just think it's a good reminder that a lot of the things that people get hung up on are just, it's about them. It's not actually about Caleb Williams and what he's actually about as a football player.
Okay, so I actually kind of audible there because I was gonna take a team, and then then you took the Vikings, and I was like, screw it, I'll take the Bears. So there is a team I want. Let me see if you take them.
I have one team that has been super talked about all offseason, and then another team that I feel like hasn't really been talked about at all. But some part of me, and again, this is kind of just a heart pick at this point, I think I'm going to take the Titans.
Okay.
I just...
the hardest team in football, in my opinion, to wrap your arms around, the Tennessee Titans.
It is, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who works in that market down there because we all saw it was kind of it was the idea that most everyone has and good organizations do earlier more often now is, hey, let's get as many weapons as we can around our young quarterback and just see what we've got here and try and do that. And so you go out and get Calvin Ridley to put him next to DeAndre Hopkins after a disappointing kind of tumultuous tenure, sort of incomplete assignment in Jacksonville coming off the gambling suspension there. And you've got Tony Pollard in there after last year spitting the bit as the lead back in Dallas to go along with what they've already got in-house there. But again, I know for me it often simply goes down to this, but man, Bill freaking Callahan lives there now. And you have got you look at everywhere. I went back and actually looked at all the guys that he had coached along the way during his time. And you go back to Dallas early on there, it was Zach, it was Tyron Smith coming in as young guys. He was the one that set the foundation in the NFL for what those guys became. You went to Washington, it was Brandon Scherf and Trent Williams. You went to Cleveland, Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, who, Joel was a high pick. Wyatt Teller wasn't supposed to work out like that, but on and on down the list, everywhere he's gone, especially young guys benefit from that. So you look at Peter Skoronski, you look at J.C. Latham, and the double team picks I saw Nate Tice posting the other day
were good in preseason week 3 when Will Levis played.
Yeah, like there's stuff to be excited about, and pedigree-wise what they're getting. They invested in the right stuff around it. And Will Levis, kind of a wild card, kind of a maverick, like we saw last year, total boom or bust. It was either going 50 yards down the field or it was going right at the line of scrimmage. And again, limited sample size, but some of the stuff in preseason that you would expect with Brian Callahan of, hey, some of the things that you did, it's a little more pistol than it was full-time gun in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow, but I saw already a little bit more of Will Levis taking what the defense gave him than I expected after his rookie campaign. So call me crazy. I'll take it. A little bit of the Ravens coaching tree making its way down there on defense with Jeffrey Simmons, and we'll see, but I'm excited a little bit about that team.
I mean, we talked about Levis and the kind of first glimpse of Callahan's offense with him earlier in the week, and both Ollie and I were like, oh, okay, this looks good. Like, he's definitely going to build this thing around what he does well. And I think, like, if Levis can take even a minor leap, it should actually be a pretty efficient offense. Defensively, I was like, it's hard because they've added so many veterans who, I think you can look at some of the veteran additions. You can say this feels like it would have been an amazing offense 2 years ago, but I do think that they're just good players now. And this is the flip side of the Ernest Jones trade. They traded for him. Linebacker was my biggest concern about defense. They did sign Kenneth Murray, which I actually think having Jones next to him really helps a lot. I just right now, this team, like, I don't know exactly where the ceiling is, but I think the floor has been raised a lot by how active they've been in free agency. So it's a good pick for that end because I do think they're going to win games.
And from just a vibes perspective, I'm excited because I know one of the hallmarks of the Mike Macdonald coaching tree now was defensive tackles dropping into coverage at a rate much higher than their peers. And the idea of Jeffrey Simmons or Tavondre Sweat, who they drafted doing that.
That's like, someone blocking out the sun. Like,
that's just him hitting the Heisman, which is a real thing he did in a football game where he scored a touchdown because God is good all the time.
Only counterpoint to the Titans. Will Levis dating Victoria Fuller. Bachelor villain. I don't know about that. All right.
Big offseason for quarterbacks on Instagram, making it official.
Yeah.
By the way.
A lot of Bachelor contestants. All right. I am up next, and I'm going to take the team that I wanted to take, which is the Bucs. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like the Bucs aren't getting any respect after winning the division and basically bringing everyone back?
I think so. I don't think it's quite as bad as last year where we just all kind of wrote them off as like, oh, they'll be in contention for the number one pick, even though they've got two stud wide receivers and a future Hall of Famer there. Like, I think especially too, someone brought this up the other day, like Graham Barton was one of my favorite linemen coming out of the draft, who was an awesome pick in the interior where they needed a lot of help. And you look, it's Liam Cohen over there as the offensive coordinator now, right?
Yeah.
That's the interesting part to me is it's just stylistically what Liam comes from as one of those McVay tree guys, so different from what Dave Canales was about that I'm fascinated to see what that mesh looks like. But yeah, we probably aren't giving them enough credit, especially considering we both took the easy bait elsewhere in that division.
Yeah, that to me is just like, I think anyone can win the NFC South potentially. I'm picking the Falcons, but still very winnable. So if the Bucs win, that pick hits for me. I actually had the Bucs last year, by the way, and that was obviously worked out because they made it. They actually, and they won a playoff game too, which was remarkable value. Okay, you're up next.
All right.
I'll stop saying that. There's a couple teams that I'm very intrigued by.
Yeah, and this is the one where, like, now at this point, I'm trying to think a little less about the strategy just because you're looking for wins however you can come by them here. Yeah. Some of it I worry about, division cannibalizing itself if I've got too many teams there. But that being said, if I was going to bet, I
know who you're thinking about.
I know you. Yeah, you know exactly who I'm thinking about. I just have to do some quick math here because I have to make sure I didn't take two teams in there already. Or else oh no, it didn't. All right, you know what? I will I'll round it out then and I'll go the Colts.
I knew you were gonna take the Colts.
Yeah.
I wanted the Colts. I was really Colts bust. I was thinking because the Colts, the upside feels really high. Like if Anthony Richardson hits, but I think this is the right place.
Do you feel better or worse about Anthony Richardson and the hype machine coming off what you actually saw in the preseason versus what we were talking about in the offseason?
The same. I feel the same, which, we talked about it in depth earlier this week. Awesome drive, some misses later, some of which weren't his fault, but like it's going to be a roller coaster, I think, early on. The dude's barely played football.
Yep, 100% agree. This is really about, like, does that roller coaster ride even out a little bit when you get to November? That's really all that matters.
Okay. So you have the Bucks there. So we have, let's see, Colts, pardon me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 teams left. We will roll through. This is where it gets really hairy. Oh boy. Okay, I will take the. Oh no, 9 teams left. Ooh. I guess I'll take the Steelers here. Defense. This is Mike Tomlin. Wins bet. Can't believe Steelers won 10 games last year. What the hell?
I was just going to say, like, the offense isn't going to be worse than last year. Like, they almost threw a parade for going over 400 yards for the first time in what felt like 5 years.
Oh, by the way, it was announced today. Shocking development. Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's fine. It's fine. I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound like a hater.
No, it's hard to get excited about. I guess I'm more just curious how they're actually going to manage it, because it was, I think in a lot of people's minds, the idea that it was ever really a competition feels like it was probably not the case. And so now I guess the question moves to, all right, well, how long is the leash? Like, is it just Russell Wilson, or do the financials and the lack of real investment in either give them the ability to pull the ripcord on this and say, hey, listen, you haven't earned the right for us to stick by you, even if this looks when we know that Justin Fields can offer us something in this scheme. In theory, again, we got to see it consistently. And, he had opportunities in the preseason and didn't just nail it. So I
think with the reason why you might see rest for a while is the defensive slate is not particularly difficult to start the season. You're going Falcons, Broncos, Chargers, Colts, Cowboys, who, are a great defense in some ways, but you can run the ball on, which I think they're going to want to do. Then it gets a little bit Raiders, Jets, gets a little trickier there. But yeah, so like, I feel like if they can run the ball efficiently and muck things up and keep it dirty those first few weeks.
That Cowboys game is going to be the real, like, first smell test of that, just because, like, the image of what Buffalo did to them in the preseason up front is going to live with me for a while in terms of Russ. I mean, that was the first Russ outing we saw where both him and Fields were just getting destroyed behind, a group. Broderick Jones really struggled in that outing against Gregory Rousseau and, a longer defender there. And so that's a group, we talked about Dallas with a lot of youth. They're getting ready to trot out Zach Frazier at center there. Troy Fautano's dealt with some injuries, so I don't know when we're going to see him back in that lineup full time, but that's a group with a lot of pressure on them up front and the scheme that can help them. But we saw when they got asked to pass protect and do that against better competition, it didn't look great.
Okay, who you got?
I am going to go. I'll go the Cardinals here. I was talking about the Cardinals with Nate Tice the other day. This offense should be fun. Like, Kyler Murray, seemingly locked in now in a way that people might have had questions about before. I saw they re-signed their center, who had a big time year. Like, he's kind of been a guy that came out of nowhere and performed really well and earned that. But I know you're a big Trey. Yeah, Froholt. Like, I know you're a big Trey McBride fan who had a monster year last year, but like Marvin Harrison Jr., everyone you heard talk about seeing this guy is like, yeah, of course, this is exactly what we saw in college. This is a ready-made NFL player that's going to give Kyler a true number one and make life easier for Trey McBride to have another great season. Yeah,
I am holding back on Cardinals, like, feisty play. I'm not there yet because I think the defense is just bad, frankly. Also just saw Darius Robinson. They might IR as their first round draft pick. But I think the offense is going to be fun and feisty and annoying. So where we are in the draft, it makes a ton of sense. Okay, so I'm just going to read the teams left, by the way, just as we kind of bring these things. So we got remaining teams: the Carolina Panthers, the Patriots, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Broncos, the Giants, and the Commanders. So we have 7 teams left, pardon me. And I shall It's funny because I've been so low. I feel like I've been lower than consensus on this team, but I'm going to take the Chargers here. Another defense that I have been publicly skeptical about, an offense that is certainly lacking in terms of skill players, but you got a very, very good coach with a very, very good quarterback. He should be able to run the ball. So, at this point in the draft, it feels fine.
Yep. Right spot here. It seems like one of those years, if we're banking on a team to like pop out of nowhere at this range, this feels like we're probably a year away from that, but I think definitely could reset in some ways that are good. I was hoping you wouldn't take this team. I'm going to go Washington here.
I love it.
I'll take a flyer on Jaden Daniels and say, he's a rookie coming in where, hey, we can ask questions about the protection, but you've got, it's not Bryce Young. You've got a bona fide number one receiver in Terry McLaurin that lives there that's going to be able to help you out there. We'll see if like De'Ami Brown and company can help contribute in that as well. The backfield's got some good options to help him out there. And like, again, you tried on the offensive line. You went with the strategy of let's take former Chiefs offensive linemen from a good system, albeit the guys that were, rotation and backup players. Tyler Biadasz comes over. Dan Quinn knows him from his time in Dallas. So you've got a veteran for your rookie quarterback in front of him. The defense, we'll wait and see exactly what happens here. We know it's been a fire sale of edge talent there over the last year. But again, if we're betting on one thing, like, man, the Jaden Daniels stock just seems like it keeps climbing higher and higher. Every time this dude gets in front of a new group of people, they're all amazed not only by the ability, but, from the neck up, he seems like a special football player.
Yeah, the defense is really interesting to me because there's just some very obvious holes. But there's also blue chip talent, right? I mean, the defensive tackle group is as good as any in the entire NFL.
D-tackle group, Frankie Louvu comes over, who I know was a hipster favorite for everyone in Carolina. Jeremy Chin in the secondary.
Interesting addition. I'm curious to see. That's one where I'm actually very interested in seeing how Dan Quinn deploys all of them, because the talent is different from what he had in Dallas, but he did show a willingness there to kind of mix things up, with mixed results at the end. But as you said, I love that pick here. I would have taken them there because Jaden Daniels himself is going to probably single-handedly win some games for them if he is what we expect. And I love that the point about McLaurin is so important because with Young, like, it cannot be stressed enough. And I think back to like early Joe Burrow too. If you have a bad offensive line, but like a true number one, you can still make things happen. It's just if you don't have either. It's when things get really ugly. Okay. This is where it gets really, really tricky. Oh, man. We got the Pats. We got the Panthers. We got the Raiders, Broncos, Giants. I am... I'm gonna go Broncos here.
Honestly, that's probably what I would have done next, actually. So
Sean Payton, efficient offense. You could play the Raiders and the Chargers. Probably steal a couple of those games. I don't know. I don't feel great about it.
No, I mean, but none of the picks down here we're going to feel great about. I guess, it's interesting. Obviously, Sean Payton and the love affair with Bo Nix is very real. Bo Nix is a player with, some physical limitations, played in the scheme that we've all talked about in college, like looked at least in control through the preseason. And I think, not insignificant. We'll see if the weapons ever really materialize. But, strong running back room there with Javonte Williams and Audric Estime. Offensive line has, they've invested in it. I don't know if it's the best group necessarily, but they're going to have a running game for them there. And then from the rest, we'll see.
All right. Which of those aforementioned teams are you going to take?
Ooh, buddy. Let's see who else I've got already. So I have the Jets and the Bills in the AFC East. I have got the Eagles and the Washington Commanders in the NFC East. I'm trying to just make sure I don't triple up too much on anything here. I'll probably go. Man.
Okay.
I guess I'll go Carolina.
Really? Okay, interesting. Because when I was doing, I did a power ranking series for a few weeks, and the Panthers consistently landed at the bottom. Now, had a nice preseason drive with Bryce Young. Maybe like there's a little bit more optimism now with the coaching staff. Like, what is your thinking putting the Panthers over the Patriots, Raiders, and Giants?
I think it might just be like, hey, I feel like maybe I know a little less. Like we're at the point right now where you know how some of those the quarterbacks end up getting drafted high coming out of college because we've seen them play like 10 games and we think about what could be here. I think just because we've seen so little of all of the new parts on the field right now, there's part of me because the defense is going to be interesting considering they just decided to let all their good pieces leave outside of, Derek Brown up front. But I think offensively, like, again, you at least tried to get some answers. Like Deontay Johnson, decent at getting open. We saw some of, again, limited, but JT Sanders a good pass catching option. We're going to have to wait on Brooks in the backfield. We'll see about, Xavier Legette and how that ends up turning out there, their top wide receiver pick. But there's at least more in the cupboard now this time around. And Bryce Young was a quarterback I liked enough last year to maybe not totally give up if anything happened. We'll see. Like, the guards they paid a ton of money to aren't great. The left tackle still is probably the biggest part of that offensive line that has to improve. Ike Ekwonu, the former first-round pick, but it's, again, just maybe because I feel like I know less about them than these other teams at this point.
I like that line of thinking. I'm going to go Patriots here. For a couple of reasons. I've loved what I've seen from Drake May. I do not love what I've seen from the offensive line. But I think he's kind of feisty enough to where if the defense can play decently, which I think they can, I think they can win some ugly games once he's in there. The defense. So, I think I had them in my top 10 defenses. Since then, they have traded away Matthew Judon and Christian Barmore is out. That said, I still think they're going to be okay. Like, I still think they've got certainly solid players at all three levels. See what Gonzalez looks like coming off the injury. But I kind of think like Keon White could take a big leap this year. Uche Jennings is still a good pairing. It's still a good linebacker group. They've got a good depth in the secondary. I just think it's still going to be good. So, and I like this. I know you lose Bill Belichick, and obviously that's massive. But everything I've heard about the coaching staff and the defensive coaches who remained leads me to believe that they're still going to be pretty good. So I'll take the Patriots here. I mean, it's pick 29, whatever, or 30
right.
or something.
Exactly. Not gonna lose sleep over. And like you said, we talked about this with the Browns having a side of the ball that at least does one thing right. And I'm excited to see Jalen Polk's development this year, especially when we start to see him and Drake May at the same time. You and I talked about him a lot over the course of last year. Ton of pop in that wide receiver room in Washington. You want to talk about feisty. That dude is the definition of like a juice player in that room. So he may not be the best separator. He's probably not Rome in a lot of ways, but man, he'll get you guys jacked up and ready to go. So fired up for him. I'm going to take the Raiders here.
Yeah, I'm sure Raiders fans are furious that we've waited this long because they have a really good defense.
It's one of those teams that like you look around at enough of the names on it and you're like, all right, this could be something. Like, again, we've talked ad nauseum this offseason about the D-line now that you add Wilkins there with Max Crosby, who's one of the best defensive players in the NFL, period. Tight end room, Michael Mayer and Brock Bowers. I am fascinated what they're going to do with that. I mean, we know Gardner Minshew, it seems like you're pretty limited in that. And that, to me, the Minshew pickup, he's like a good line of demarcation quarterback in the league where he's been around, he's played enough ball, he's a veteran presence, all that stuff to come in and be able to tell you, is the guy on your roster capable of really being anything? And Aiden O'Connell getting beat out by Gardner Minshew tells me, if we didn't already know, hey, the quarterback of your future is not on this roster. And now you get to ride the roller coaster of the jort-wearing Mississippi mud flap. And what a good time that is.
The defense is good enough to where the point where like I probably, part of me wishes I had taken them earlier, just because with Minshew you get the variance and they'll have a few good games, and if the defense is good enough, you can win a fair amount of games that way. So I certainly agree with the decision taken there, which leaves me with the New York Giants, pick 32. Let's just wrap here. Do we think it's like the Giants are going to be picking number 1 overall in the draft? I mean, it's always a crapshoot. It's very impossible to tell. And I think any of the top final 6 teams, maybe we talked about, could certainly be there next year, because the Giants have a very good defensive line. I think the defense could be decent. And, we've seen when Daniel Jones he just hasn't been protected at all. I guess what gives me pause is the skill players don't make sense to me as a group, and I don't think they did enough on the offensive line to believe that Daniel Jones, can be significantly better than the guy we've seen. So it's just hard for me to gin up a supreme amount of optimism for this.
Nope. The one thing that maybe gives me some pause is like Malik Neighbors, by all accounts, seems like he's come in there and been a pretty instant, face change in that offense. But I'm with you. It starts up front, even though, Daniel using his legs was something we weren't going to see in the preseason, right, and no doubt adds an element to their offense that helps everybody when he's on his game there. I do think that they're, very real chance of picking it. Do you think Brian Daboll keeps his job if they're in that range?
No, and I think it's going to be a bad decision, because I still think he's a good coach.
I'd agree. I would agree.
How I would answer that question. All right. To recap, the Mina Kimes team: Niners, Ravens, Texans, Packers, Cowboys, Dolphins, Falcons, Seahawks, Jags, Bears, Bucks, Steelers, Chargers, Broncos, Patriots, Giants. The Mike Golic Jr. team: Chiefs, Lions, Bills, Bengals, Eagles, Rams, Jets, Saints, Browns, Vikings, Titans, Colts, Cardinals, Commanders, Panthers, Raiders. I'm kind of jealous of you grabbing the Titans and Colts where you did.
That one feels like a good bang late, but a lot of mine feels like very my side of the ball is high variance. I am either going to manage to win this thing somehow, or I am going to lose in historically bad fashion for us in this competition.
Well, Mike, we will get a chance to see, because the GOAT Sam Hoppin will tabulate. He could just be completely making up these numbers, and I would because I'm not checking them at all. So shout out to our guy Sam Hoppin. I hope that there's some integrity to what you're doing there. I believe it. There's no man who makes charts like that would be fictionalizing them with no goal. Yeah. Anyways, as mentioned, you guys can check out Mike every day, YouTube, getting your podcast feeds. I'm sure he'll be back on during the season. Next week, I'm doing a pod with Dominique and Bill. That will be dropping on Monday, a little bit early. And then the season's going to begin. Woo! And we're going to go to our usual twice a week schedule, with Dominique coming on to help me recap Monday Night Football and go over some winners and losers from the week. I can't wait. And of course, later next week, by the way, I'll be back with my first week 1 preview. I'm pumped about that. I'm pumped for the season to start. I am pumped to win the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny team draft yet again. You can check this podcast out on YouTube at youtube.com/@MinaKimes. There's also that interview with Amon-Ra St. Brown on there and some other fun stuff. Thank you, as always, to my partners at Omaha Productions, producers of this show: Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, Kevin Mattice, Tucker Tashton, and otherwise, I will see you guys next week.